The Curses and the Covenants, a History Weaver Mystery, Book 2, by Connie Worden, read by the author. Chapter 28. Ma had a half day of tests and appointments in Cheriton the next day, so we headed out after lunch. She also wanted to do a little shopping and get a few things she couldn't find in Beaver Row. After what was a long outing for her, we were both getting hungry, and Beaver Row was still a bit of a drive. I suggested that we go out for dinner so we didn't have to cook when we got home. It was almost like old times, both of us feeling celebratory after receiving some good reports back from her appointments. She was making good progress, I could tell, but it was nice to have it confirmed by the experts that she was surpassing all expectations. Her speech was still a little labored, and she had to pause in between words to collect the next one. But she was carrying on entire conversations. By the end of dinner, she was starting to fade, and her movements were becoming strained. Her face sagged in a way that wasn't normally noticeable when she was rested. I needed to get her home and into bed. Autumn's relentless march toward winter had already shortened the days considerably, and it was well dark by the time we pulled into the driveway and I'd helped Ma out of the car. The motion-detecting light above the front door came on when we made our way toward the door, and at first I thought nothing of it. It suddenly occurred to me, however, that I had forgotten to switch on the light before we'd left the house. The light shouldn't have come on for us. Ma, being the thrifty soul she was, always insisted that the outdoor light was never turned on during the day, or unless we were going out for the evening. I would have turned it on for us when we went out if I'd thought of it, given the possibility that we might be coming home after dark. But I was sure I hadn't remembered to flip the switch. I know Ma hadn't turned the light on because we'd both been busy with me helping her out the door and down the stairs. I cast my mind back to how we'd left the house, and my clear memories told me that neither of us had touched the light switch on the way out. "Ma, wait," I hissed at her. "That light shouldn't be on, should it?" She stopped, puzzled. "I didn't turn it on before we left the house, and I know you didn't," I told her. "You left it on the other day, maybe." "No, I don't think so," I corrected her. I would have had no reason to turn the light on. "Let me check the door, make sure it's still locked." I tried the handle, and it didn't turn. So far, so good. I felt under the mat on the outside of the door where we probably foolishly kept a spare key. The key was still there. Was the mat slightly akilter, however? Probably just my hyper-vigilant imagination. No doubt it had been crooked when we'd left. However, I had an issue with things not being straight, and was constantly squaring up anything that jarred against that idiosyncrasy of mine. I would have likely straightened it with one foot unconsciously if I'd noticed it when we left the house. Still, maybe I hadn't noticed it. But the additional sign of something not being just as we'd left it had put me on high alert. "Wait here," I told Ma. "I'm going to go in first." She sighed, but likely found it too much work to argue with me. She settled down onto the seat at the top of her walker and prepared to wait while I checked out the house. I used my own key to open up and crept inside as though I was the intruder, turning on no lights at first, until I'd been all through the house. I walked as silently as it was possible. I don't know what I was hoping to learn by sneaking around. If anyone was still in the house, they surely would have heard the front door open. For no apparent reason, it seemed to me as though I'd be less likely to be surprised by an uninvited guest if I kept all the lights off and tiptoed through the house. After I'd given the house the once-over in the dark, my examination of every nook and cranny with all the lights on showed the house to be clear. Nothing appeared at all disturbed. I was beginning to feel silly by the time I got back to Ma, and she was beginning to get cold sitting outside. "Cold," she said sternly, wasting no spare words. "Sorry, Ma. Everything's fine, I just wanted to make sure. But you're right, I must have left that light on sometime." She shook her head disgustedly as she went to get herself ready for bed. "I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling the unexpected light coming on had produced for me, but I did my best to scold myself out of it. My memory wasn't perfect. I'd forgotten I'd put on the light, that was all there was to it. But as I settled in bed for the night and reached for Julia's journal on my nightstand, I had another wave of foreboding wash over me. The book was flipped so that its back cover was uppermost. Again, it was such a small thing it shouldn't have meant anything. It was only because I knew I was always in the habit of laying my books face up when I put them down that I got prickles all up and down my spine. I'd decided I'd plow through the rest of the journal that night in order to take it to the police the next day. But now I paid much more attention to what I was reading than I had the night before. Had someone else wanted to lay hands on the journal badly enough that it seemed worthwhile to break and enter? Technically, it had only been entering. That spare key had never been a problem before, but I would definitely be finding a new hiding place for it tomorrow. Under the mat was the obvious starting place anyone would have looked. Because all my senses were still tingling as I read through the journal, I picked up on something I likely wouldn't have otherwise. There was a missing page almost at the end of the book. Someone had taken scissors and cut out a page. I could just make out the barest fringe of the missing page where it had been cut very close to the spine of the book. All that followed the missing page were a few more of the ink drawings. If it was a page of writing, it was her last written page. Again, taken by itself, it would have meant nothing. It could have been Julia herself on an earlier occasion who had decided to cut a page out of her journal. But with all the pieces added up together, I decided I was certainly mentioning all my suspicions to Pete in the morning when I brought him the book. He might think I was overreacting, and perhaps I was. Once I had worked myself into a nervous state, I might have started noticing all sorts of other little things that meant nothing. Things I wouldn't have noticed if I wasn't already looking for anything out of the ordinary. All of the oddities may have already been in place before I left the house, and I hadn't observed them because I wasn't looking for them. It was what I told myself so I'd be able to sleep, but I hadn't really convinced myself. I was a long time lying awake, listening for any sorts of strange noises in the house before I finally fell asleep and dreamed unhappy dreams. September 1st, 1898. I find I can hardly tear myself away from my reading. Fortunately, I don't have many other pressing tasks to attend to. I shouldn't say fortunately, as the loss of my husband and baby are the reasons I have no other pressing tasks. And those losses are not fortunate. That certainly is the wrong word. I am, however, coming to see them as less tragic than I once found them. Certainly providential, to acknowledge God's sovereign hand in them. Though not providential in the way one would normally use the word, not a blessing exactly. But perhaps, looked at the right way round, perhaps a hard blessing. Back of their deaths, back of the curses I've been mulling over and over from Genesis 3, I do at least see God's mercies. And that's the first thing I notice when I read God's words after man's sin in Genesis 3. God spoke to the serpent and said that he was cursed. God spoke to the earth, the ground, and called it cursed. Nowhere does he call the man and the woman cursed. The comfort I've found since I noticed that fact has been immeasurable. Yes, God spoke curses over the serpent, really Satan, and over the earth, and the man and woman bore those curses. But they themselves were not cursed. They were not accursed. They were not condemned. In fact, they were redeemed, not in spite of the curses, but through them. That is the magnificent truth that is beginning to dawn in my heart. But that light is growing in my heart. In the room it is growing dark as the days shorten already. The light is growing dim. I am not yet returned to my full strength. I have been going to bed with the sun, grateful to collapse into dreamless slumber. My eyes are bleary already, and so I must write again on another occasion about what I'm learning and discovering.